Good evening. Today is the 6th day of January 2016, and I'm very happy to have a dear friend, Prakash, visiting with us today. Welcome, Prakash, and namaskar.
Thanks for having me.
When did you first hear about Sri Aurobindo and Mother? Do you recall?
Well, I was born into it because my father and my grandfather had already an association with the ashram, and I'm fortunate enough to have books signed by Sri Aurobindo.
Oh,
His books signed by Sri Aurobindo. So it was as if from a very young age I was exposed to Mother and Sri Aurobindo.
how young? How young were you?
Well, as I said, I was born into it. My father and my grandfather had already visited the ashram.
In what year?
My father
Sure.
came first in 1943 and my grandfather in 1950. I was born just a couple of years before then.
1948.
50. I
50.
was born in 48.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I
My
see.
first visit to the ashram was in 1957. And it was a very special experience. We spent a couple of months here, and you had so much contact with the mother physically, starting with the morning darshan, the balcony darshan. Then you could see her in the afternoon playing tennis. In the evening you went to the playground and you saw her at the playground and you received her blessings. So it was a very special experience.
So you were 9 years old.
I was 8.
Eight
Yes.
years old. And did she give you the ground nuts also?
Yes, very much so. Groundnuts and toffees made by Ganpatram. Yes.
And when did you settle here permanently?
Well, I came to study at the Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education in 1964. Before that, I was in Kenya, where my family had settled. When I finished my schooling, I was able to write to the mother, and she was gracious enough to accept me as a student of the higher course. So I completed my higher course here, and then I joined the center as a teacher, and ever since I've been a teacher at the Center of Education.
I'll ask you about that also, but could you tell us a bit about some of your teachers who were special, that you remember as very special?
Well, I think almost all of them were special in their own way. I had Kishore Gandhi, I had Medanand, I had Jugalda, I had Patiji, I had Chitradi, I had Amitadi,
Oh,
I had Manoj Das, I had even K.D. Sethna, and perhaps the most outstanding of them all, we were able to persuade Nolinida to take our French class in our final year at the higher course.
oh, I didn't know that. No one has said very much about Medananda in the interviews we've done. Do you have any special recollections of him?
Well, he was a walking encyclopedia, and I think that's why Mother put him in charge of the library. He seemed to know everything there was to know. He was very versatile in his knowledge, especially of culture and religion and philosophy.
I was told that Jugal knew Sri Aurobindo's work so well that if you asked him a question, he could tell you the book and the page number. Is that correct?
I think that evolved. When I had him as a teacher, perhaps he was still deep into Sri Aurobindo studies, but he was basically my physics teacher.
Oh,
And later on, he turned more and more to Sri Aurobindo's works and Savitri and so on.
did you know Temi at all?
Yes, I had a personal contact with Temi, but not as a Temi Ben, but not as a teacher. I knew her quite well.
Oh,
And I remember we had a Savitri reading session at her room in
Yes.
Savitri, in Golconda once.
Yes, we did. And Nirod Baran used to come also. I don't know if you were there then when he came.
No, I wasn't there.
He was 100 years old and he would walk from his room all the way to Golconda and sit with us, greet Temi, and then when we finished he would go back and walk back at 100. Tell me a little bit about your teaching. What do you teach and what did you begin teaching?
Well, I started as a maths teacher because I had studied maths and science at the high course. But then after a couple of years of that, I changed to geography because we had enough maths teachers according to me. But geography was a neglected subject and most of my classmates said they found it boring, and I thought just the opposite. I thought it was a really very interesting and also a very important subject. So ever since I've been teaching geography and related topics, and it gives me scope to discuss a whole range of issues from science to philosophy and art and culture and so on. And most importantly for me personally, it has given me an opening into environment and ecology. And the lake project has grown out of my teaching geography because I felt that classroom teaching was not enough. The students needed to be out in the open and having a personal contact with nature and learning firsthand about ecology and the environment.
Well, this is very interesting. So, you actually founded Merveille?
Well, that's going a little too far, perhaps, but
Okay.
let's put it this way, I was one of 3 teachers who together started the Project Eco Lake. Merveille is one part of Project Eco Lake. Project Eco Lake was designed to take our students and teachers to the lake estate to have a first-hand experience of nature, to do gardening, to do energy studies, to do everything related to environment and ecology in particular. So the other 2 teachers were Chamanlal Gupta, whose specialty was applied science and energy, and Chitra Sen, who of course was head of the biology and life sciences department. We all 3 agreed that it was important to take students out, and ever since that project has been ongoing.
Can you tell us a little bit about the project, about Merveille? I think you have a paper here, perhaps.
Yeah, if you'll permit me, I'll read out something that we wrote a few years ago
Yes.
about lake and the background to lake. Because in a sense, it's part of Mother's vision of things. An area of scenic beauty about 10 kilometers west of Pondicherry, the lake was one of the places that the mother visited during her evening drives in the 30s and 40s. Even then, she seemed to have in mind a special place for the lake in her plans for the future, and she spoke later of the ashram atmosphere extending all the way to the lake. Early in 1955, Louis Allen, who had come from Africa to help, quote, build the mother's university, unquote, following a trip to the lake, proposed to the mother that the ashram should buy the land that was to become the heart of Lake Estate. The mother approved, and on 1st May 1955, she went there to sign the deed setting up the Sri Aurobindo Ashram Trust at Lake House number 1, designated as her private residence. I'll just interpose a few comments.
Yes.
The de facto transfer of Pondicherry took place in November 1954. This property was purchased early in 1955, but Pondicherry was still under French legal
Yes.
procedures. So mother wanted it to be according to Indian law, and Lake Estate was in Tamil Nadu, which was part of India at that time. So that's why she signed the Ashram Trust deed at Lake Estate on 1st May 1955. The de jure transfer took place only in 1962. On a later visit in 1959, on reaching the lake, she remarked, "Oh, how beautiful," and told persons accompanying her that we should make it a paradise on earth. And then, in one of her interviews with Louis Allen, she told him that the land at the lake would be used for the center of education. Already in 1955, a project she named New Horizon International was proposed at the lake, quote, for the specific purpose of meeting the challenge of our civilization, unquote. Its goal was, quote, the production of a constant flow of the kind of motion pictures that will foster a nobler, truer life for humanity, unquote. It was further envisaged that New Horizon would provide every facility to talented youth from all parts of the world, particularly from India, who aspire to film careers. The program would include every phase of motion picture production and management under the auspices of the Aurobindo International University Center.
Did you meet Alexander Markey?
No, I did not, because he was there just before my time.
I knew Louis Allen very well, of course.
Yes,
We were close friends. But you know the story of Alexander Markey?
Yes.
Could you share it with us?
Well, basically, when this film unit was proposed at the lake, Mother designated Alexander Markey, who was a film personality, I think from Switzerland, to become the director of the institute. And unfortunately, he had to go for an operation to Switzerland, and he passed away following that operation. And Mother says that other things also she expected for the realization of this project did not materialize. A devotee had promised some money, did not come through, and a friend in the church who had offered to arrange for the transfer of some church land at the lake to the ashram for this project, that person was transferred, and so the whole thing fell through. But when Mother was, this is what comes on later, when Mother was asked if the project was over in 1960, she replied no. So till then at least she had hoped to have a film unit making the highest quality of films to uplift, you can say, mankind to a higher level. But there's something more about what was intended with this project, New Horizon International at the lake. New Horizon was planned to provide for an international community resident in a small township. So it would seem to be the seed for Oroville already.
Yes.
In the 50s.
Huh. Yes.
And incidentally, we tried to get William Greaves involved. He took an interest. He's an independent black film producer from America. But he couldn't click it, in the sense he couldn't arrange all the funding necessary for such a project. This was much later in the 80s.
Oh.
So, I'll repeat the last part. New Horizon was planned to provide for an international community resident in a small township that would be designed and landscaped with an eye to the aesthetic and would be modern in every respect. There was to be large-scale planting of trees throughout the whole domain, and the chief architect designated was none other than Antonin Raymond, who was responsible for the design of Golconda. So it indicates how much importance Mother had given to the whole project.
Yes.
New Horizon did not materialize as planned, but a few years later, when the Mother was asked if the project was over, her reply was no. She also referred to plans for a ceramic factory and refractory earth unit by the lake, as well as an agricultural college and the development of farming at the lake. When Oroville was first proposed, it was planned to come up by the lake.
I remember that, yes.
And some lands were bought for the township in the area. At that time, the Mother described her plans for the Mother's Pavilion thus, quote, "It will be surrounded by a lake, tall trees, various kinds of flowers, There will be rockeries in Japanese style with varieties of cactus, small waterfalls, small pools with lilies, unquote. Referring to the park of unity that would surround the pavilion, she spoke of 12 gardens which will represent the 12 attributes of the Supreme Mother. She went on to elaborate some of the flowers and trees that she wished to have there. Even though Oroville was later shifted away from the lake, it may be noted that these plans were originally envisioned for the lake. So in a sense, what we have at Merve is perhaps the manifestation of something that Mother had already created and made ready. Keeping in view this background to the lake, I've already explained this. A group of teachers of the Center of Education launched a project for education and research in 1979 that would involve our students in regular fieldwork at the lake. So Merve is one of the projects of our activities of Project Eco Lake. It's part of Lake Estate. The whole of Lake Estate is a little over 400 acres today. It has grown from the initial relatively small plot, which is called Mainland today. And Merve itself is something close to 100 acres. Merve was largely or almost entirely a wasteland.
I remember it well.
And so do other ashramites who tell me about their early picnics to the lake.
The soil was so difficult to work, wasn't it?
Yes, in fact, we can say there was no soil.
Yeah. Gravel and clay, laterite.
Yeah, basically it was hard sandstone.
Oh.
When it's dry, it's very hard, and it's difficult even with a crowbar to penetrate it. And in fact, we've had people, including soil scientists, coming and looking at it and saying, how did you manage to grow anything in this? But that was part of the challenge. In any case, we were not too knowledgeable about what to do and how to do it. We were keen to green the place, to afforest it. And Narad and other Aurovillians were amongst those whom we consulted right at the outset for their advice based on their own experience in Oroville. I remember you gave me a list of trees that we could plant. And we also talked to Joss and Mali and others.
Yes.
So,
now,
yes.
To begin this work, how did you actually begin it? It was a wasteland.
I can only say it's Mother's grace. Because looking back at it, it seems to be such a difficult challenge, especially considering the conditions. It was early days after Mother's passing, and the ashram trustees were not willing to give any funding for such a project. And they even asked us not to raise funding from outside sources which might divert money from the ashram. Fortunately, they agreed to a small amount from a friend that we could take through my grandfather, A.B. Patel. And I always tell people that we started this project with 5,000 rupees and faith. The idea was that if Mother wanted the thing realized, it would come through. And believe me, it did. Within 2 weeks of starting the project, Champaklalji came to know about it. And he was extremely pleased that we had started this project because he knew, I'm sure, what Mother wanted at the lake. So people who were giving money to the ashram through him, he asked them to give it for our project.
I see.
And for the first few years, that's how we were funded. And we just had enough for our needs, basic needs. It was not too much, it was not too little. And in a sense, it was good that it was a bit slow because we were in a rush to do things, but in hindsight, we have gained so much experience over the years that it's better to do it in a measured way rather than in a hurry. After a few years, when Champaklalji began to withdraw more, I talked to Dyuman, who was one of the pioneers at the lake and one of the ashram's senior-most disciples. So he asked me how much money we would need, and I told him the amount, and he said, well, that's not a big sum, the ashram can afford it. So from that time till today, we receive a regular allowance from the ashram, which has ensured that we can continue without worrying too much about survival. Because I understand that there are places or projects which are not funded in a regular way, even in Oroville, and they have little difficulty. Either they have to earn for themselves, which changes the whole emphasis of the project. And we had decided right from the outset that Merve should be a place which did not have any commercial angle to it, which did not insist on returns, because there was enough of that attitude elsewhere. And we said there should be something which is primarily for beauty, and also giving back to nature what we have taken from it. In the sense that we have, as a race, as a human species, we have been exploiting nature and its resources. Mother even went to the extent, I think in the early 60s, of saying, ils ont tout abîmé, which means they've spoiled everything, referring to what humanity has made of this planet.
Yes. Yes.
So it was thought that we should at least green this wasteland and make it an attractive and inviting place. But we also wanted a spiritual angle to it, in the sense that it would be a collaboration between human beings and the divine at one level, and between matter and spirit at another level. So, but we do not speak of all these things to everyone, because at one level it is an ecology project, and we have had ecologists and scientists visiting and giving us help and advice, and we in turn sharing our experience with them. So we have done a lot of activities in eco-restoration, from soil conservation and water management to beekeeping and making a collection of mother's flower significances. This is an important aspect of the project.
Yes.
By the 70s, after mother's passing in particular, a number of gardens in the ashram area were being lost. Either we had to return the lands to lease, which were on lease, or they decided to build it up for the sake of ashramites. So in this way, we've lost Amba Bhikshu Garden or Lakshmi Garden or
Yes.
various other Kaznau. Not Kaznau so much, but Castellini and so on. So we said, but lake is there, and at least in one place we can have all the flower significances that Mother has given. It's our responsibility, it's almost our duty, and it would be a worthwhile offering to the Mother. So that has been one of our aims, and we have succeeded in a large measure in collecting most of the perennial species that Mother has named. The seasonal, of course, keep changing over time,
Yes.
but we have done that. In addition, we have also made a collection of various other kinds of plants, even those which do not have a significance, because they have their own value, their own place in nature.
Can you give some examples of some of the plants that you've introduced?
Well, the pioneering work in afforestation was done with Australian acacias, which of course later became very controversial.
Yes.
But we feel that they were necessary as a pioneer species, or at least very helpful as a pioneer species, as in much of Auroville also. And we are currently, in the last few years, we are replacing much of the acacia with more diverse, mostly native species.
But the acacia did open up the soil.
Exactly, it built up the soil and changed the microclimate to a point where other species could survive and grow well.
And it acted as a nurse tree also.
Very much so, very much. In fact, we did scientific studies with codrats, and we found that acacias and casuarinas encouraged some of the native species to grow where previously they were not able to grow in the wasteland.
What about water? How did you...
Well, that's an interesting angle to the whole thing, because in the beginning we decided that the afforestation must be rain-fed. Because if you're going to arrange for watering of your forest, then of course it limits the possibilities for other people. So that's why we tried out hundreds of species, and the acacia and the Casuarina junguniana turned out to be the only ones in those conditions which were able to grow well in rain-fed conditions. Now we wanted to limit the use of water and make it very eco-friendly and not dependent on resources or on technology. So we actually, for the first few years, we were just borrowing some water from Llewellyn in the neighboring cocoa land. But after a few years, we got a hand bore, by hand drilled a bore well, put a hand pump, and got another hand pump to pump it up the hill. So it was all by hand with very simple, low-cost devices which could be replicated elsewhere. So in a sense, it was a demonstration also of what is possible, not using high-tech or expensive methods of getting water. It was only much later, about almost 15 years after we started, that we were offered a deep bore well to mark the 50th anniversary of the ashram school. Oh. And so we got in for a deep bore well, which was becoming necessary because our garden was growing. It was no longer just a forestation, it was also a garden. And garden plants, of course, need much more care and watering.
Yes. And you had fairly good soil for the annuals and perennials?
We were able to make it good enough, yes.
Did you compost?
Yes, we have done a lot of composting, including vermicomposting. We have used cow dung, we have used paddy straw, we have used lake algae. We've tried every organic material that we could, but we have not used chemical fertilizers or pesticides, with very few exceptions.
Insects?
We use neem oil or other traditional remedies in case of insects. And sometimes companion planting.
What is the state of the garden right now? How do you feel about it?
Well, I wish you could have shown something of it in this program. Perhaps you could still do it.
Well, I think what we would like to do is actually go out and visit with you on the site.
Yes.
And take a video camera and just walk around with you.
Yes, that's right, because I don't like to make too many tall claims. I like people to come and see for themselves and judge and assess by themselves how they feel, whether they think it was worthwhile, whether they think it is a nice place and a beautiful garden. But I think I can say that there have been Orovillians who have come and appreciated it, and that's high praise for us.
What is the ashram's feeling towards Merveille today?
I think they appreciate the work that we have done, especially for the students. It's a great opportunity to learn, and many of our students are much more ecology literate than before. Some of them have even gone on to further studies or careers in ecology. And of course, the ashram trustees now realize the importance of ecology and environment. So even to the government, they can say that, well, we already have an ecology project, and the government does recognize that contribution. Other than that, they don't restrict our freedom to grow according to our own inspiration and guidance. I'd like to say a few words about the name itself.
Yes.
Merveille is a French word meaning marvel, and it echoes a message of the mother. Aurobindo came to tell us that the world is a marvel moving towards its realization. But merveille, as two words in French, is mother is looking after, mother is watching over. So we have always tried to invoke her presence. And she once told Louis Allen that I have come and meditated here, that is at the lake. And wherever I have meditated, I have left behind an emanation of myself. If you concentrate, you can feel here my presence in every leaf, in every stone.
Oh, how beautiful.
And I think that's perhaps the most rewarding part of our project, to feel that presence and to invoke that presence and be guided by that presence.
Could you tell us just a little of the times you met with Mother and spoke with her on these topics?
No, mother passed away long before
Before even we began.
we started, but I'm sure that it was her inspiration, because she continues her work even after leaving her body, perhaps even more so. I had other correspondence with the mother, but that was relating to personal matters or my future and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So those are perhaps not so pertinent.
Yes. Now there are 3 areas that I know of. There's mainland, Matu, Udayanam,
Yes.
and Merve. Can you tell us the different functions of those places?
Mainland is the headquarters of the farm of Lake Estate. It has the office, the kitchen, the workshop, the laboratory, the garage, and so on, an oil mill, gardens, biogas plant, and so on.
Mm.
So it's the headquarters, and it basically, the whole of Lake Estate is run from there. However, within Lake Estate, there are these 2 other places which have some autonomy. That is Matrudainam, which is what Kadaland is now called, and Merve. So Merve, as I have explained, is mainly for ecology and for garden. Matrudainam combines growing flowers for the samadhi with some fruit orchards, and trying to also make a collection of flowers with significances. So there is some difference in emphasis. But in a sense, they're all complementary and part of, you can say, an effort to make Lake Estate what Mother wanted. She had given an interesting message in 1966, perhaps when there were differences amongst the people in charge or people working at Lake Estate. This message, I think, is very general, or can be made general, to all group activity. Lake Estate, it is only in harmonious collaboration that effective work can be done. The important thing is to find the point on which you can all agree, and after this is firmly established, each one must be ready to yield his personal will in order to keep intact this point of harmony. Blessings, 29th March 1966.
Louis Allen made a copy of that for me in Mother's hand.
Yes.
And presented it to me. And it was one of the most important things, I believe,
Yes.
that I learned about Lake Estate. How many people do you have working there, and do you have volunteers?
Well, basically it's a very small team. We do have a few volunteers, but we also have to engage mainly women workers from the nearby villages. So we have something like 20 odd women workers at the moment.
Oh.
A couple of watchmen, and 4 or 5 of us as part of the ashram team at the Lake Estate.
Have you had any experiences with eucalyptus?
Well, we were warned right at the beginning that eucalyptus is an exotic which depletes the water supply. So we restricted very much the use of eucalyptus, because in any case it's not nitrogen fixing, unlike acacias. So we just made a small collection of eucalyptus, and that's what our experience is based on, but we did not use it as a plantation species. But Louis Allen had planted a whole avenue of Eucalyptus citriodora, which he had got earlier. which gives a nice lemony scent when you enter Merve.
Now, recently, you had a great setback in one of these cyclones.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes, Cyclone Thane was unusually fierce, and when we went the next day, it was a scene of complete devastation. A lot of our trees, and I think the experience in Oroville was similar, a lot of our trees had fallen over or had broken branches, etc. So it was quite a lot of work to repair the damage. Some of the trees were pushed back in place, others were pruned, others were taken down. But also there was something gained in the sense that it made clearings which made possible the introduction of other new species. Because earlier it was a bit overgrown and perhaps a bit too shady in places.
And do you consider it an area for also for the experiment of low water consumption, drought-tolerant species still?
The afforestation work was based on finding such species, in fact. So we identified over the years, first few years, quite a few species, including Australian acacias, but others also which are relatively drought-resistant and which could be used, depending on conditions, for afforestation programs, especially rain-fed programs. Yes.
Do you have a section for xeriscaping? An area for xeriscaping, or is the whole thing xeriscape?
I'm not quite sure if I understand.
Xeriscaping has become very important in California because of the lack of water. So they try to plant all these plants that use absolute minimum water.
No, I think it has not gone to that extreme in our case. I think
because you have the bore wells now.
Yes, we have. In addition to that first hand bore with a hand pump, which later was turned to a single phase 1 horsepower pump, we have an 80-meter deep bore well, which has a solar pump as well as an AC grid supply pump. So much of the time we depend on solar energy for pumping water. And we have done a calculation, or an estimation rather, that we use as much water as we put back in the ground. That is, we recharge the groundwater. In the 90s, there was a controversy in Oroville when an Israeli professor came and said, all this afforestation is going to deplete your groundwater. So many Orovillians were quite taken aback, and a study was done with the help of sensors on 3 species of trees, including Acacia auriculiformis. And they determine how much water is pumped out. Now, even from a common sense approach, you can say that nature recycles everything. So depending on how much water you have, the trees will grow accordingly. But in any case, our estimation was that we put back as much as we take out, or even more than we take out.
What would be a good time to come out? Would February be one of the better times? Early February?
Yeah, early February would be good. Right from now, actually, because weather is clear and it's very pleasant to be out there. But I'd like to mention one more thing, and that is, in order to maintain a certain sanctity of the place and ensure that the presence is more concrete, we have had to limit human presence in Merve. So it's not open house. We ask people to take permission before they come. And we certainly discourage any picnicking or any other use of the place than what it is meant for.
I think that's extremely important. We already know from Oroville and the Matrimandia and the buses and the lorries.
Yes.
So I'm very happy that you're doing that. Could I ask you, botanically, what are some of your successes with species that you take great joy in?
Well, I think that would take a long time, and I would need probably some reference material. But I can say that we have recently completed a survey, or an ongoing survey is there, which has provided us with a list of some 1,400 species available or present at Merve.
Oh my gosh.
This includes indigenous species which we have helped to regenerate or reintroduced. It includes other species introduced from elsewhere in India or abroad. It includes things that have regenerated on their own, and so on. But I'd like to just, since you have asked me this question, Pichandiculam Oroville Bioresource Center, that is Joss's place, had conducted a 3-day workshop on the TDEF, the tropical dry evergreen forest, which is our forest type in this region.
Yes.
I think it was in 2002, and I was one of the invitees. And it was proposed to shortlist those species which were becoming rare or vulnerable, so that the forest department could be asked to take more conservation measures. So ultimately they prepared a list of some 40 species plus some 10 grass species which are highly specialized. Out of the 40 species, we found that 16 of them occurred in Merve. So naturally.
Naturally.
Yes.
Yes.
Because that area had been forest at one time, and some of the more hardy and tenacious plants continued to survive, but they used to be chopped down or browsed or whatever, and we were able to bring them back to health and restore them.
Do you find a difference in the climatic temperature?
Oh yes, the microclimate is definitely much better than what it used to be in the early days. And it's generally considered much cooler than in Pondicherry, especially at this time of the year. We even have had temperatures going down to 16 or 17 on occasion.
I see.
We have a weather station because it's part of our research activities to correlate the growth of our trees and forests with the weather conditions. So we've been taking rainfall and temperature and other parameters right from the early 80s.
I see. This has been a wonderful, wonderful time with you. We've actually learned so much, and we will come out with the camera and do a series in Merve itself.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prakash.
Yes. Just one more
Anything,
word.
yes, anything in closing, whatever you like.
Yeah. As I told you in person the other day, we have tried to avoid publicity, especially popular publicity like being written about in newspapers or appearing on television programs, because we think that it would detract from our main work. We want to still continue our focus on the work that is on hand.
Yes.
And the other thing is, when people come to know, some of them want to visit and you're not always sure of their bona fides. So that's why we prefer to work in a very low-key way and make the whole place an offering to Mother.
And I think to all the devotees who see this video, that is an extremely important statement, and we should all honor it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. Namaskar.